Hi everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ciara and I'm the Digital Events Manager at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up and TechSoup are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. For those of you who haven't attended a webinar session with us before, Connecting Up and TechSoup facilitate an annual training calendar of online webinars, workshops, boot camps and webcons to help the social sector upskill in all things digital. Check out our training and education menu on our website for more events coming up online. But enough about that. I'm excited to welcome you today to From Chaos to Clarity, setting yourself up for bookkeeping success with Linya Reid, owner of The Connected Bookkeeper. With 20 years of experience in working within businesses, Linya understands the importance of making the bookkeeping process easily understood and even simpler to manage. She's here today online how to show your bookkeeping software to make the day-to-day processes as easy as possible. An industry award winner and appropriately certified, Linya is experienced in trust accounting practices, bookkeeping foundations, and holds regular workshops on the basics of bookkeeping, so business can outsource their bookkeeping with confidence. Before we begin, we have some housekeeping. All your lines are muted, so if any technical issues, please type it in the questions box on your webinar panel, and I will be able to assist you. If you have any questions during the session, please also type these in the questions box, and Linya will answer them by the end of the webinar. We really encourage you to ask as many questions as possible throughout the session to make it as dynamic and interactive as possible. Remember, no question is too silly, but also note your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you're on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, close all other programs to help you have the best experience today. Note that the webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you as soon as we can after the webinar ends. I'd also like to remind you that there's a short survey at the end of the webinar and would really appreciate if you could take the time to complete this. That's all from me, and I'll hand you over to Linya.
Hello, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us here today. As Ciara said, I have got some experience in the bookkeeping field. I'm the owner of the Connected Bookkeeper, and I'm here to help take some of that bookkeeping chaos away from you and hopefully have you leave with a bit more clarity around how it all works and how you can make it work for your business. So I won't talk too much about myself because that all gets just a little bit boring. So this welcome here is just talking very much about what Ciara just said. I've had experience working within small business for a very long time. And what I like to do in regards to bookkeeping is really just try and make that process as easy as possible for you. So whether I know your industry or whether I don't, I certainly try and make it the actual process of bookkeeping as easy as possible for you, because it is quite a rinse and repeat situation. But I always like to make sure that bookkeeping is set up for you, because the easier it is, the more inclined you're going to be to do it and do it regularly and make sure that it is completely up to date and can actually give you the information that you need when you're starting to look at your reports. So I will get started, and what I'm going to be talking about today is my top 5 tips to make your bookkeeping as easy as possible. So please, as Ciara said, feel free to ask questions at any stage. I'm happy to just have a chat about it. I do try and make bookkeeping slightly less boring than we all seem to feel it is. It can be a very dry topic. And I'm quite aware of that. So I do like to try and make it a little bit more lighthearted and fun. So absolutely ask your questions, fire away. Happy to chat. And as Ciara said, absolutely no such thing as a silly question, because when it comes to bookkeeping, we're not born knowing this stuff. So it's really important to ask those questions so that you can just get that little bit more clarity, and then suddenly things will fall into place and you'll just be able to do it sort of with your eyes shut, which is what we want to be doing. So my first tip when it comes to bookkeeping is to make sure that you're investing in your education. So whether that's something like today, coming along to a webinar, getting involved in a workshop, you know, having a look at software, recordings of different software that you can be using, having a look at their how-to videos. There's short courses, one-on-one teaching. The important thing about it is to find out where you have potentially have a block, or you have a bit of a misunderstanding, or somewhere that you just get a little bit stuck, and just doing a little bit of investigating on where you can learn a bit more about that. So it's not something that you need to, you know, go and do a certificate for in finance or anything like that. It's really just making sure that you are increasing your knowledge, because at the end of the day, we just want to be making this bookkeeping stuff as simple and easy as possible. So there's all sorts of ways that you can do that, like I've got on the screen here. So workshops are something that you can attend, and that can be something that can be specific perhaps to your industry, or it could be specific to the software that you're using, whether that's MyOb or something else. It can be, you know, something that just really lines up so that when you're starting to do your bookkeeping work, you know the programs that you're using, you understand how they work. So that's one of my biggest things, is when I work with people, I like to make sure that they understand the how and they understand the why as well. So it's all well and good to have a software system and you know how to use it, but if you're not really understanding why you're doing certain things, it can then cause issues down the track. So for example, if you're not really understanding why you're entering certain data into your bookkeeping software, then there's the risk that you potentially aren't doing it correctly, and therefore that can have a flow-on effect with your reporting and the information that then comes out at the end. So one of my biggest things is I always like to work with you as a business owner, and then working with your accountant or other people who have to have that end result, whether that's a report or whether that's you know, registered for BAS and you need to be submitting GST and that information as well. I always like to work as the person in the middle, because what I quite often find is that as a business owner or somebody who's doing the bookkeeping within a business, that you don't always understand why you're doing that, or you just know that it needs to be done. So that's where I find a lot of issues, and I stumble across that with a lot of my clients, is that they have been doing these things and pressing these buttons without the actual understanding of what the end result is and why they're doing particular things. They could know how to do it without any problems, but it's making sure that you actually understand the end result and why you're doing that particular thing. So that's why I like to talk about investing in your education when it comes to bookkeeping. It doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be sitting there and doing, like I said, you know, a full course, a TAFE course, or a degree or certification, but it is certainly important. So if you have got staff members, if you're a business owner and you have got staff members that are doing this for you, it's always good to have a chat with somebody. And it could be something that, you know, could be an accountant, could be somebody who helps you one-on-one and helps you get set up within your business to make sure that these things work for you specifically. Or it could be something like this, a webinar. You know, you have your staff attend a webinar so that you can understand. And if you are a staff member within a business and your bookkeeping is part of your role, then it's certainly important to, you know, put your hand up every now and then and just say, look, you know, I don't quite understand that. Would you mind if I go and attend this certain thing, or go and talk to this person, or just get a little bit more understanding? Because taking that initiative is only going to be beneficial for you in your position and your role, but also with the business overall, particularly when it comes to bookkeeping. Because let's be honest, none of us got into business or got into what we're doing to do our bookkeeping, with the exception of me. That's probably a little bit different. But we didn't get into business to do our bookkeeping. It's something that we have to do as part of our business. So it's really important to understand what you're doing and how you're doing it. So if you've got any questions on that, please, as I mentioned, feel free, pop questions in the chat. Absolutely go ahead and do that. That's no problem. But I won't rabbit on too much more about that. We'll move on. So coming in from that investing in your education is one thing, but the second thing that I like to talk about is investing in your software. And if I'm going too fast for anybody, please just put your hand up, let me know, and I can dial it back a bit. But in regards to your software, it's really important to not look at it as an expense. I mean, yes, it is, but to look at it as an investment, because making your bookkeeping as easy as possible makes things super simple when it comes to end of financial year or end of quarter and all of the reporting that needs to be done on it, in a legal basis. So making things easy for an accountant to go through and reconcile and review. If you can get your software and have your software up to date and running beautifully, then that's going to save them time. They're going to understand what's going on in the background, and therefore that's going to save you money, because they're not having to chase you backwards and forwards and work out what's going on within your business and what's going on with your software. So it's really important to really take some time and invest in your software. So MyOb is a great platform. There are others out there as well that you can investigate. I'm not going to recommend one over the other specifically, or certainly not in this scenario, but if you were to talk to me specifically, then I can certainly have a chat with you. But the thing is, with your software, regardless of what you choose, it's always important to know that you can tailor the software to fit your business. And I find that can be a bit of a barrier for some people as well, because quite often you register for the software, you sign it up, you've got everything running, and you go, yeah, this is great, everything's running smoothly, but you're not quite sure where this expense needs to go, and you're not quite sure how we need to record that, or you want to record your income in different ways, not the actual tailored basic template that comes with this software. So it's really important to understand that you can tailor that software to match your business, and that is something that I really encourage you to do, is to make sure that whatever software you use, you set it up to suit your business, but also to suit your brain, because our minds all work a little bit differently. So obviously with the software, they have to set it up so that it suits the majority of companies or the majority of businesses, or that the majority of businesses can make it work. And if you haven't sort of spent the time watching things like software demos or reviews and that sort of thing, you can get caught up in feeling like you have to stick with the status quo and stick with what is happening with the software as it sort of arrives out of the packet. But all of this software that you use, you can tailor it very much to your business, and also to the way that your mind works. And that is something that I particularly like to focus on with people that I work with, is making sure that all of this stuff is as easy as possible for you to do. Because like I said, to start with, if we don't have that working smoothly, then we're going to have that resistance and we're not going to want to do this stuff. But it's one of the things that we have to do. So in regards to investing in your software, most software platforms have got different levels as well. They have different subscriptions, and they have different products and add-ons and things that are available to them. But the important thing to know is how it works in the background is the same, regardless of what software platform you use, because what it needs to know is essentially your revenue, your expenses, any assets and liabilities of the business, and any equity that is within the business as well. So essentially those 5 topics are managed within whatever platform you use. So if you're a smaller business and you might only be sort of starting out, then perhaps one of the lower end softwares is easier to get started with. But I also do encourage you that if you have got the view to becoming a certain size, or you know that you're going to be at a certain turnover, or things are going to be high volume or anything like that, it's really important to understand and sort of future plan a little bit that you might be better off jumping into a platform that's maybe feels a little bit big, or a little bit too much initially, because changing platforms can always be a little bit tricky as well. So really important to have a bit of a think about that when you're thinking about your software and how you're using it. There are so many different ways that you can integrate with your software as well. So that's something also to think about. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it's not always just the software that we need to be considering. We need to be having a look at what other information needs to be coming in. If you've got different platforms that you work on for, you know, different subscriptions, or you have revenue streams coming in, it doesn't necessarily always come into that particular software for your bookkeeping. So if you're part of a network, or if you're part of a group, or if you're part of a department or anything like that, quite often you will have a set program that you need to be using, and that might not have the full functionality of the bookkeeping software that you need. So then it needs to be imported or replicated or moved over to your bookkeeping software that you keep separate. So it's really important to have a look at that side of it as well. So there's a little bit to think about with your software. And that's why my second tip in here is certainly to invest in your software. So invest a bit of time to work out what's going to be easiest for you to manage, because again, that resistance, if we've got time and we've got something and we just don't want to be having to deal with it because it's heavy and clunky and busy and I don't quite understand it, I don't really know, then you're less likely to want to deal with it, basically. So we want to be making sure that everything that you've got with your software is easy to use, and it's important to spend the time to look at the software, make sure what's appropriate for you, make sure it matches and works with the programs that you have to use. So if you are part of a department, or if you're part of a network or a franchise or something like that, then you need to make sure that you have got that platform that is required to be used, and then how that then integrates with your bookkeeping and how you can manage your bookkeeping. A lot of the platforms will have some kind of bookkeeping element to it, and it's really important to understand that as well and how that works. So obviously I can't comment on those individual platforms, but one of the things that I really enjoy within my business is working with new people and finding out new industries as well, and finding out new platforms and how they work, because quite like I mentioned, the software in the back end all does the same stuff, and that then reports the information that we need to have. But it's good for me to learn how different companies and how different you know, sectors and things set up their bookkeeping, for me to just learn those different platforms and learn that information, because then I can then explain how it works in the background and how it is then presented to you, and then explain how you can get the best out of it. So that's a lot of what I do and a lot of what I teach, because like I mentioned, bookkeeping is rinse and repeat. It's the same sort of stuff. You need to be recording the same information regardless of what industry or sector you're in, because you need to be essentially producing this information that goes to the ATO at the end of the day. So they request the same information regardless of what you're doing and where you are. And so I like to sit there and look at where we're at with the software. So if you've got any questions specifically about different software or anything, please feel free, pop them in the chat. Happy to talk through those. But one of the main things with your software is to tailor your chart of accounts. So a chart of accounts is basically a list of categories that you record your transactions against. It's probably the simplest way that I can explain it. So if you've got money coming in, it goes to a certain account within your software. If you've got money going out, then it comes out of a certain account from your software. So tailoring your chart of accounts, which come as a, you know, sort of a predetermined package within each software system, is really important to make sure that suits you and it suits your business and it suits the way that you think and you work with your bookkeeping software. So that's something that I'll touch on a little bit later as well. But I think I've talked enough about investing in your software at this stage, so we'll move on to the next one. So now this leads on from the software side of things and considering software, we need to have a look at our processes. So within your business, it's important to have a consideration of whether you are outsourcing your bookkeeping, whether you are doing it yourself, whether you want to be having things like digital files, whether you want to be having hard copies of things, you know, like receipts and paperwork, etc. You need to have a think about who needs access to your software, who needs access to your bookkeeping records, and then talking about like the frequency and the repeatable steps that we have in place for bookkeeping. So you might have a company or a business that requires a full-time bookkeeper because there's a lot of money coming in, there's a lot of money going out, there's a lot of, and I'm not necessarily talking about dollar volume, but there's just a volume of transactions that are coming in and going out that we need to manage. It could be, I have worked, for example, within the real estate industry, and obviously that's quite different from non-profit. But for example, quite often within those companies, you have trading accounts, but you also have trust accounts. And so I'm quite versed within the trust account space, and I have spoken with people, and I've helped people with audits. So I understand the importance of having money that is very much allocated for specific purposes, and things can't be, you know, taken from this account to go over there or transferred here to use that for this expense. Everything's very, very structured and has to be managed very, very carefully. So that's something that I like to work on, specifically with businesses, is to consider your processes. So if you're looking to outsource your bookkeeping, I believe, it's very much my strong belief, that you need to understand what you're outsourcing. So again, this comes back to the how and the why. You might understand how to be entering or managing your bookkeeping, but do you understand why you're doing it? Do you understand what's going on in the background and why you need to be reporting these particular things or recording that information? Once you understand and you know why you're recording that particular detail, and you understand how to do it, then it's important it's important that you've got your head around that before you go to outsource. So outsourcing can be to a bookkeeper, to somebody who's external from your business. It can be somebody that you have hired, that perhaps they're an administrator and bookkeeping just falls under their, you know, their role and their responsibilities within the business. It could be outsourcing it to an accountant. It could be outsourcing it, you know, it could be a partner of yours that might be doing it for you. So I've worked with a lot of different people in a lot of different roles within bookkeeping, and my first thing is to make sure that as the business owner or the person that's kind of in charge of all of the financials is to understand why you're doing all of the stuff in the background. And so making that decision to outsource or to do it yourself is something that you should really consider when you're getting all the bookkeeping set up initially, or perhaps you're coming through and you're going to do a review of your bookkeeping processes, which I always encourage you to do sort of, you know, every 12 months or so, because quite often, you know, there's new software that's available, there's new advances, there's development and all that sort of thing that comes in over the course of a 12-month period. So it's always good to review how things work. And also as well, people within these roles always work a little bit differently. So there's nothing wrong with, provided the work is being done correctly and provided the information is being put in and it's coming out in the reports at the end. If somebody works slightly differently to somebody who was in the role previously, there's nothing wrong with making those adjustments. And there's always ways that you can work, you know, more efficiently and more effectively as well. So reviewing your processes and considering how this stuff works for you is really important. Things like digital files and hard copies of information. So you do need to keep that, and every industry is slightly different as to how long you need to keep your information for. In regards to the ATO, it's a minimum of 5 years. So any of your financial transactions through a business you need to hold on to for 5 years. There's a lot of software there's a lot of software that you can enter and hold digital copies of that within the software. So you can, snap a photo of a receipt or a bill or an invoice, and you can actually attach that information within the software itself. So that's one way of doing it. You can also, take photos of it and store it within a file on your computer and back it up, have it saved in the cloud. As long as you have the ability to access it quickly and know where it is, then it doesn't really matter where you keep it. I think keeping it within software is amazing. It does add an extra step when you're entering your software, your information within your software, but I think it's worth doing, because if you're looking for a particular transaction, or somebody comes and queries you on a particular transaction, then if you've got a copy of that information attached within your software, then you can see the original receipt or payment or whatever that is, and you can refer to it really quickly. Probably second best is either having it stored digitally on your computer or within the cloud, or a hard copy. If you're still working hard copy, I mean, as much as we want to move to digital, there's still a lot of hard copies floating around, and particularly over the last 5 years. So you don't necessarily want to have to go back and enter all of the stuff from the past 5 years. But as long as you've got a system for storing all of this information, then, I think something's gone a little bit, sorry, just bear with me one moment. I've lost some light here. You probably can't see me very well at the moment. Sorry about that. Hopefully that comes back on in a moment. We've just, it's always good having technical issues, isn't it, in the middle of all these things? There we go. I'm back. Sorry, so yes, talking about storing that information. So as long as you've got that process and you've got something that you can refer back to quickly, if somebody comes in and needs to access that information, then the process itself doesn't matter too much, as long as it makes sense for people, and as long as you've got it documented somewhere so that people can follow that process. Because look, things happen. You can't always get to do that process. You might have somebody who's sick and the work still needs to be done. So if you can document what your processes are, that's also really important as well when it comes to bookkeeping. And I know this sounds like a lot of work. There's a lot of this stuff that needs to be done in the background, but once it's set up once, and that will take some time to really bed it down and make sure that everything's working properly. The review should only take a little bit of time every 12 months or so. I always sort of suggest around the financial year, because that's your brain's kind of in that number sort of phase. Is just to review your processes and make sure that things are running smoothly within for you and within your business as well. So things like considering the frequency that you're doing your bookkeeping, and any of the repeatable steps that you can just make really easy and work really easily for you within your business. So frequency is going to look different for every business. There's some people that are going to be, that might be within a company that has to have, somebody that is full-time doing the bookkeeping, or that bookkeeping is part of their role and they have to do that every day. So for example, again, using the real estate industry, you've got to receipt your rent every day from your tenants that are paying the money in. So that's a process you just have to do every day. But you don't need to hire somebody particularly to do that, because it's not going to be a full-time role. But the frequency is that sort of stuff is daily. You pay out money to your landlords and your owners twice a month. So that's a bi-monthly frequency. So it's quite important to have a look at all the processes around the financials and work out what things need to be done when. But also on the flip side, you don't want to be chasing your tail and doing something for 5 minutes every day if it only needs to be done once a week. So, don't spend your time stressing out about, oh, I've got to make sure that I do this every day, when realistically it can be done within half an hour, you know, on a Friday. You can use that time Monday to Thursday to be doing something else. So that sort of stuff is something to just consider when you're looking at your bookkeeping as well. So my next tip, and this is talking more specifically about the software itself, is to set yourself up for success. So this is where we talk about using programs such as MyOb, and we have our bank accounts within MyOb, and we have our bank feeds set up. So for those who don't understand or who haven't worked with this before, your bookkeeping software, the majority of it these days, whichever program you use, has bank feeds in there. So you set up your bank account within there, put the bank details in, and then there's quite often a button in there that will just say we want to connect bank feeds, or that bank, if it's Commonwealth Bank, for example, or ANZ or whoever, they will then download and import the transactions from those particular bank accounts through to your software overnight, every night. And so that saves you having to download bank statements every day, manually line up and match everything, and then manually enter everything into your software. It basically brings in a list of all the transactions that have happened in the past 24 hours, and then you review each line that has happened and each transaction that has happened, and you say that money has come in from this particular area, that goes and sits in this account. This money is going out for this particular expense, that comes out of this account, and you record it that way. So one of the biggest things is to get the automation happening. So as much as you can automate as possible is great. There are things within your software that you can set up, like bank rules. So you can say, okay, well, every month if there's a $10 account keeping fee on my bank account, I don't want to have to manually enter that that's a bank fee every month. We can set up things like bank rules, so the software recognises and says, oh, that's a $10 bank fee to Commonwealth Bank that comes out on the 1st of every month. That's a bank fee. We'll reconcile that off for you. Don't have to think about it. So there's things that we can do within the software that will help to automate and just make life a little bit easier, which is great. The main thing that you need to be working on within your software is reconciling your bank accounts. So as I mentioned, you may very well have different platforms that you're working with if you're in a department or a franchise or something like that within sort of the accounting side of things and the bookkeeping side of things. But if you're a business that your source of truth is your bookkeeping software, so everything goes through your bookkeeping software and you run all of your reports from there, then reconciling your bank account is where you're going to spend the majority of your time in the bookkeeping space. So essentially, you'll open up your bookkeeping software, you'll see that there are a certain number of unreconciled lines, and then that's where you spend your time. So you don't need to worry about creating manual journals in the background. You don't need to worry about doing that back end information. You essentially just go line by line and say, this money has come in from here, it goes to that particular income account, or, you know, money has been put in for, you know, an investor has put some money in, so it goes into this particular account. It's making sure that you understand when the money's coming in, how to allocate it, and then making sure that the money that is going out, where to allocate that, because that information is going to then report onto your profit and loss or your balance sheet information at the end of the quarter, end of the month, end of the financial year. And we need to be making sure that we're accurate and right on top of allocating those into the right spaces. So this is where the reconciling of your bank account is where you're going to be spending the majority of your time. If you have got if you use your software to create your invoices are coming directly from your software, then there are ways that you can create repeating invoices. So that's, for example, that's just making sure that we're being as efficient as possible and not having to reinvent the wheel and do the same thing over and over and over again. There are ways that we can automate a lot of these processes depending on what you need and what your business is, how your business is set up to work in the background. Because let's face it, it's bookkeeping. It's not everybody's cup of tea. We're not always really interested in doing it, but it's something that has to be done. So as much as we can automate in the background as possible, that's where we want to be. But essentially, as I mentioned with the reconciling your bank accounts, recording your revenue and expenses, or recording the money that's coming in and the money that's going out, is where you need to be focusing most of your time. So I mentioned briefly before about your chart of accounts. So it's really important to make sure that your chart of accounts is the technical term, your list of accounts, is set up so that when you're reconciling that money coming in and leaving your bank accounts, you can allocate it to the correct space. So I'm not going to go too much into the nitty-gritty, but we have 5 main accounts within bookkeeping. So you have your revenue and your expenses, and they fall in under your profit and loss report. So that shows any money that comes into the business, any money that goes out in regards to basically the operating side of the business. And then you have your asset account, your liabilities account, and your equity account as well. So it's important, and those 3, they show on your balance sheet. So what happens is when you've got money coming into your account, you need to have a look at that and say, okay, well, that was, it might be a membership payment, it might be a donation, it could be, a payment for a particular fee or a service or whatever the money is that's coming in. It's important to know, is that money coming in, and have we earned that money? So is that money coming in, for example, for a service? And so therefore that's income, or is that money coming in that is somebody's investing in the business, or the owner might be putting some funds into the business, for example, and therefore that would then be sitting within an asset or a liability account on the balance sheet. So every business is very, very different on how that works. I mean, a traditional for-profit business is revenue comes in and sits there, and then we subtract any of our expenses, and then that gives us our profit at the bottom. But it's important to understand those accounts in the background, and again, everybody's slightly different, so that when we're reconciling our accounts and we're recording our revenue and expenses, we're putting it into the right places, because that then filters through into our reporting, and how that then sort of comes out at the end for the information that we send through to the ATO, for the information that we send through to our accountants, and information that we need to send through to shareholders and investors, and all of that information as well. So where are we at time-wise? I won't go on too much more. I'll leave it open for some chats at the end. But the last thing I wanted to talk about briefly was understanding your reports and the information that comes out of your software. So when you're putting your information in, sort of in the front end of the business, front end of the software, it then filters through to these different reports that we have in the background. And it's really important to have you don't have to understand it in great detail like an accountant or anybody like that, but you do need to have a basic understanding of what these reports look like and the information that you're getting out at the end, so it makes sense with what you're putting in at the start. So a profit and loss report, and I'll again just talk about this very, very generally, because every business looks very different, but a profit and loss report is a report that talks about the performance of a business over a particular period. So if you perhaps are looking back over the month, could be the quarter, could be the financial year, essentially what this looks at is it looks at any of your revenue, any of your money that has come in to the business, and then we subtract any cost of sales or direct costs to the business. And these direct costs are they are expenses, but they're in a slightly different category, because if we didn't have those costs, then we wouldn't be able to make the revenue, if that makes sense. So if, for example, you're a product-based business and you are selling a particular product, then you can't sell that product if you don't have it. So buying that particular product to then on-sell is a direct cost, because if you don't have it, you can't sell it. It could be, if you're a service-based business, it could be wages for the staff that are doing those particular services. So that could be a direct cost to your business, because if you didn't have those staff, you wouldn't be able to offer those services and charge for those services, and therefore you wouldn't be able to earn that money. So a direct cost is something that relates specifically to the money coming in. So on our profit and loss, top line is always the revenue that comes in. We subtract any of our direct costs, and that gives us our net profit for the period. And then after the net profit, we enter all of our other expenses, or all of our other expenses are listed. So that could be things like rent, electricity, office expenses, buying staplers, all of that sort of stuff then becomes and sits underneath our net profit. And once those amounts have been subtracted from our net profit, that we then have our gross profit, or sort of end of period result. So whether that's profit, whether that's a loss, whether it's a break even, that's that final figure. And that is over a period of time, like I said. So that could be, you could look at it over a month, you could look at it over a quarter, financial year, however often you wanted to do it. I always encourage people to review this over like a month, on a monthly basis, because it just helps to keep your sort of finger on the pulse. You can understand what's going on. It's a regular thing, and then you can start to spot discrepancies and things that might be a little bit odd or not quite happening properly. Simple things like if you have a card linked to one of your bank accounts and there's been some fraudulent activity on that card, if you're reviewing these reports and you're only reconciling ad hoc here, there, and when you get 10 minutes to do it, you can miss those things, and things can happen, and then you've got to go back and you've got to work it all out, and where did this money come from, why is it coming out? That's got nothing to do with our business. Unfortunately, none of us are immune from that sort of thing these days. There's things happening all the time. So making sure that you are reviewing your reports on a regular basis and reconciling your accounts on a regular basis will help you avoid those things as well. Sorry, I can't say avoid, because like I said, none of us are immune to that, but it's making sure that we're across it so that we can pick it up if something does happen like that to us. One of the other reports that you would want to be looking at, probably not every month, but certainly every quarter, every financial year, and these are reports that your accountant will be reviewing as well, is your balance sheet. So the profit and loss talks about the two accounts of the revenue and the expenses, and then the balance sheet talks about the other three, which is the assets, the liabilities, and the equity. So basically, an asset is anything that the business owns, a liability is anything that the business owes, and the equity is what's left over. That's kind of the simplest way that I can explain a balance sheet, and given the name, everything has to balance. Essentially, it's your assets minus any liabilities that you've got equals your equity. And so those sides of the equations have to balance. Both the figures down the bottom of those have to be exactly the same, and that's why it's a balance sheet. So a balance sheet is a report that is set on a particular point in time. So you could run your balance sheet as of, the 30th of June, or you could run it of the, 15th of April. It doesn't really matter. It's just talking about the business's financial position on a particular day at one particular time. This is how many assets we had, this is the liabilities that we had, and this is what the leftover is. This is what the equity within the business is. So that's something you don't tend to sort of run too often. Might be a quarterly thing, could be every 6 months, certainly every financial year, you'll have a look at the position and see where things are sitting at, particularly when you're starting up and you might have more liabilities and you have assets, and then that changes over time. So that's another important report to just be aware of. But when we're talking day-to-day reports, it's really that profit and loss that you want to be looking at, because that starts to, after a little while, it starts to show you trends and starts to show you information that's been happening across the business for however long. Start sort of looking at the monthly, and then you can start going back and comparing periods and looking at trends over time. Another report to consider, or something to have a look at as well, is a budget and a cash flow report. So when we're talking about a budget, we're talking about knowing or estimating what our income is going to be and what our expenses are going to be. So therefore, kind of where we're going to be sitting. Do we have enough money coming in to cover the expenses that are going out? If not, do we need to get some more money in from somewhere to be able to cover those, running costs, expenses, that side of it, so that we're not, going negative. Do we need to have somebody come in, and do we need an investor for a little while we're, generating more income, and then we start to pay that money back? So that's something that we look at with a budget. A cash flow is working out exactly when that money's coming in. So a budget's kind of an annual thing, or you could be setting it up for a quarter, whatever works for you and within your business, and forecasting. But then we have a look at a cash flow, which is where we're looking at the particular timing of the money coming in and out. So you'll be actually able to have a look and go, oh yes, my bank account's we're going to have X amount in there for this period, then there's going to be expenses come out, then within another couple of weeks it's going to be this amount. So that's kind of, the cash flow actually shows you the flow of the money coming in and out specifically. So when we move on from that, we also, if we're registered for GST, so obviously I can't see whether we are or we're not, but what we've got is a business activity statement. So that is something that needs to be submitted. That can be monthly or it can be quarterly, depending on your turnover and the amount of money that is coming in. And that basically, we just need to make sure that we're reporting on the GST, and it also includes if we're paying wages, because we've got PAYG, tax and that sort of stuff within the business activity statement as well. So I just like to make sure that we have, that you've got a bit of an understanding around those reports. And obviously I'm not a tax agent and I'm not an accountant, so I can't give specific information in that regard, but that is just another report to be aware of. And the information that you're entering as you're reconciling your bank feeds is then moving into and filling out these reports in the background, so that when you click a button and you run these reports, they're accurate because of the information that you've entered in the sort of the front end of the software. So I can see that we've got maybe I've got a question over here, but I'm not sure if that's been answered. Just having a look here. So FPOS fees to be a direct cost. That would be an indirect cost, because yes, you may need to have an FPOS machine as part of your business, but you could be accepting money another way. So people could be doing a direct bank transfer. So it would actually, that would be an expense rather than a direct cost. Hopefully that's answered that question there. But aside from that, we're getting pretty close to the end. So I'll hand it over to you guys. If you've got any specific questions, I would love to hear them. Otherwise, I will just leave that there. You're more than welcome to contact me personally if you've got any specific questions or any way that I can help you out. But yeah, other than that, if there's any questions, I would absolutely love to hear. Otherwise, I'll hand it back over to Kira and we can have a chat from there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let me see. Yes, if anyone's got any questions, you just type it into the questions box. I'll be able to read them out. Let me see what we've got. Go on here. How often should I review my software and back-end setup?
I think with that sort of stuff, it's good to review it I'd say every 12 months is a good time to review it. I think you'll find that if you're running your profit and loss statements monthly, which is something that I would always encourage you to do, you'll start to see trends on that, and you'll start to see whether those reports are making sense to you. If they're not making sense, then we can start to tweak things in the background and maybe just reallocate accounts or change some information in the back end. So generally speaking, I would say every 12 months, just to make sure that you're on top of, you know, your processes are straightforward and they're easy to manage, and they work with your business.
Let me see what else. How can people work with you if they need bookkeeping support?
There's a few different ways you can work with me. More than welcome to send me an email. I have a couple of different sort of packages. So I do, you know, your standard bookkeeping. So I do that with having a chat with people and managing the bookkeeping, you know, monthly, weekly, and outsourcing. I also do some workshops as well. So I absolutely love, you know, really being specific and teaching people about bookkeeping within their business. So I've done some workshops where people have just come in and I've really explained, you know, how things work in the background of particular software. And I also go in and speak with businesses as well specifically. So if you've got a couple of different staff members that need to understand something, then I can do some workshops within a business. And I also do some resets and setups. So if your bookkeeping software is a little bit out of control, which tends to be why people come to me, they're just going, I don't really understand it, I just need to get back square, can we start again? I offer a package with that as well, so people can just come and have a chat with me, and I can just give them a bit of a refresh and a review, and we get things back to square one, and we work on your processes to make sure it doesn't happen again.
What else? At what point would you recommend outsourcing bookkeeping?
I think outsourcing bookkeeping is when you have got an understanding of what you're doing yourself. So you may not have an interest in it, so you might just go, you know what, I'm just going to outsource this from the get-go. But it's really important to understand why you're doing what you're doing, and you understand the stuff in the background. So as soon as you understand that stuff, then you can I believe that's when it's a good time to outsource if you don't want to be doing it yourself. You may find that it could be a financial thing. You might not have the resources to be engaging a bookkeeper or outsourcing it until you've reached a certain point, and that, again, that's totally fine. But yeah, as long as you've got the understanding, then I think that's when you can really look to outsource your bookkeeping.
Excellent. Has anyone else got any questions for Linnea today before we finish up? I'll give someone a second. I'll just remind everyone, yep, this recording will be put out to everyone that's registered in the next few days, along with all the slides that are included here. And I'll also include Linnea's contact details in the email. So if you do want to contact her or have any questions afterwards, please feel free to contact her. But other than that, thank you so much for joining us today, Linnea.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Excellent. I will chat soon.
No worries. Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.